I had 3 different teams: the profile team, the search team, and the messaging team, just the design ownership. I talk about profile the most because it was the one that I was the most attached to, because I had worked on a few social network type projects in the past. And profile, it's very personal. And in fact, the LinkedIn profile is a highly complex space. There's a ton of configurable and optional components. And I will say that designers on all of my teams, but especially that team, were what we call like very high level systems thinkers, which is really, really important for literally the hundreds of permutations that a profile can be, especially on LinkedIn. And one of the frameworks that we actually use, it's kind of popular, is called Jobs to Be Done.
This is the Media Machine, where media, business, and innovation intersect. Hi, I'm Johanna Salazar. I'll be your host as we examine the future of content, technology, and entertainment through 4 key pillars: process, profits, people, and planet. Kevin Flores is a design leader, strategist, and co-author of the acclaimed Design Career Handbook. With over 25 years of experience, Kevin has built and led product and design teams at some of the most influential tech companies in the world, including LinkedIn, 23andMe, and Verizon. He's helped shape tools we use every day, from the LinkedIn profile and search experience to personal ancestry and health reports at 23andMe. Always with a focus on storytelling, human-centered design, and impact. Kevin was also a mentor with First Round Capital. In addition to his work in industry, he's a trusted coach in the design community and a speaker dedicated to helping creatives grow, adapt, and thrive. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Joanna. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate that.
So you worked at a company that pretty much holds a lot of people's data, not just all kinds of personal health, everything. I mean, 23andMe, and for those who don't know what 23andMe, it's a tool that tells you everything about your DNA. So tell us what it was like to work there, to design, and what did you do? Tell us about what you did.
It's absolutely an interesting time to talk about 23andMe. In fact, as you said, the personal genetics company, they hit super unicorn status with a valuation of, I believe it was $6 billion after going public in 2021, but they filed for bankruptcy just a few months ago. And a few weeks ago, a pharmaceutical company acquired them through auction for $256 million. By the way, all of that happened after I left in 2020.
That is blowing my mind.
It is very insane. And I won't even get into all the drama of the last few years. If anybody's interested, there's plenty to read about it. But I joined in 2017 as the head of product design. It was the best timing because they had just gained FDA authorization for the serious health reports a few months before I got there. And the time that I was there pre-pandemic was, they definitely hit the peak cultural significance moment, like, mentioned in a Lizzo song and memes everywhere. And it really was an amazing experience and a very, very, very cool company. Their mission was, if I can remember this, was to help people access, understand, and benefit from the human genome. And I really have to say that everything about the brand and the product was human-centered. So I oversaw all of product design. That means everything related to when you sign up to the service and everything you see and experience. We had a really amazing customer insights team and a customer support team that our product teams work really closely with. And I also hired a dedicated user researcher. There was some fun reports like, left-handedness or, photic sneeze, like do you sneeze when you look at the sun, like silly things like that. But really the 2 big things were the ancestry features and the health features. On the ancestry side, we knew that, results could be very emotional, like for example, if there were surprises, or if people were looking for relatives. And on the health side, obviously, there could be some very serious information that's shared, particularly around, health risk estimates, anything from, your likelihood of risk from Alzheimer's to mutations that are related to breast cancer. So we did a ton of user research and user testing on interactions and flows. and especially for content clarity. So everything we did was very, very important to helping our customers understand and really in a simple way. It was super, super critical to everything we did. It's kind of scary in the past few years that the high level of attention to trust and clarity across the tech industry specifically has really, really declined. So it's kind of top of mind when I think back about, the care that we took, not only because we were FDA regulated. I mean, especially on the health side, that information had to meet certain guidelines for understandability, for example. But it's not just, out of necessity. It really is a responsibility too. So it was a great experience working there.
When you're designing something like a family tree for 23andMe, like what was the process like for you? Like what came up for you?
We followed a pretty standard design process, but the whole process of being user-centered is really being focused on what are the needs of your actual user or your customer. It's being hyper-focused on like what are the problems that they need to solve or the opportunities that you can provide them, and being very systematic about exploring those type of different solutions that you can take, approaches you can take, and again, involving the user as often as you can in like user testing. It's like, for example, we would show prototypes to customers. Other companies might call it beta users or a customer council. We did have a small set of users that were hyper, active users on the platform on both sides, and we would show them things in addition to people that had never seen our product before. So it's just that attention to that iterative process and trying out different solutions. It's the heart of a lot of the more successful products that, really embrace that iterative spirit of like continuing to get better in what you're developing or designing.
And then from there, you weren't happy with just, designing the data of the world. Then you were with LinkedIn. And at LinkedIn, you designed messaging profiles, like the tools that we use every single day. Tell us a little bit about your LinkedIn experience and what you did there.
Sure. Yes. So I was a director of product design amongst a few on the consumer side. And I had three different teams: the profile team, the search team, and the messaging team, just the design ownership. I talk about profile the most because it was the one that I was the most attached to, because I had worked on a few social network type projects in the past. And profile, it's very personal. And in fact, the LinkedIn profile is a highly complex space. There's a ton of configurable and optional components. And I will say that designers on all of my teams, but especially that team, were what we call like very high level systems thinkers, which is really, really important for literally the hundreds of permutations that a profile can be, especially on LinkedIn. And one of the frameworks that we actually use, it's kind of popular, is called Jobs to be Done. And it's another approach or framework to do the same thing that I mentioned, which is like really break down your users into segments and understanding their specific needs or the goals that they have or the tasks that they need to accomplish, and just prioritizing them and tackling them in batches. So sometimes we would have like themed launches to release new features. The last thing I will say is that, speaking to the scale part, any big company or big platform that has a lot of moving pieces, it just takes a lot of care and coordination, especially when you're dependent on other teams and other parts of the product space. That's just a sign of a mature company, a big company. It's also where things get messy and sometimes slow down. But, on the best case scenario, it really helps people to become, really strong collaborators. I only talked about profile, but obviously search and messaging had all their own nuances, but really followed the same kind of process for developing new features.
You said that one of the frameworks that you use is Jobs to be Done. Is that the same framework you use when you're scaling, or do you have to shift to other frameworks?
So I've also worked in a bunch of startups and done a lot more scrappy user research and usability testing. I literally remember, like, sometimes in a different company, we would develop mobile apps, and we would literally go to like college campuses or, areas where there are a lot of people, like malls, and literally just walk up to people and say, "Hey, can I spend 5 minutes? I'll give you a Starbucks gift card if you test this little application prototype." And really at scale, it's not much different. Like obviously you have opportunity and more resources to do greater amount of that same type of research. But at the end of the day, you're doing the same thing. Like whether it's 5 people or 50 people or 5,000 people, you're just testing the same kind of stuff at scale. And really what that's doing is just providing you a bit more confidence in what you're doing. But honestly, it's that scale matches your actual, number of users to begin with anyway. If you're testing with 5 users and you only have 500 users, that's okay. It's a funny reality about user research, and there's a lot of debate about this whole area of like qualitative versus quantitative research, which people will debate about all day long. But when it comes to qualitative research, where you're actually interviewing customers or users and showing them prototypes, that scale really doesn't matter. It's only when you get to like really, really big, diverse populations, international issues, where you really have to also lean at least equally, if not more so, on that higher scale of quantified research. It comes in a much different format. It's more about surveys and questionnaires versus like getting people to actually use products. Except for the case where you're able to like really test at scale with like really sophisticated like A/B testing and showing people different versions of a feature, for example. But that's that's only really, really large company who have a lot of resources have that ability.
You've worked across big tech, startups. You've done a little bit of everything or a lot of everything. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to turn that experience into a book.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's true. Whenever I am asked about my career, I do mention all of those things and working in all those different types of environments. I'd say the through line, which has inspired actually something I'm writing more now, but I do talk about it when I give talks, is the whole idea of continuous reinvention. There's this fact that I didn't have a path to follow, a lot of role models or mentors when coming up. We were just building products and designing experience that didn't exist before. I have to mention that my partner, Janine, and we worked together for more than half our careers. And when I started working in-house at a few large companies, she started teaching design. Why that matters is that over time, we realized that many of her students and early in career designers that I had met, managed, mentored, we discovered they were really overwhelmed by the amount of information and advice out there. So we decided to compile everything that we had learned from managing, mentoring, and teaching designers. So that's why we wrote the book. We call it a handbook because we cover a lot of topics, but hopefully in a succinct and hopefully a friendly tone as well. This was a way that we could scale our impact of helping as many people as we can.
What I loved about it is that it's like a playbook for anybody, not just people in design, just like it's a career playbook. That's what it is. It's like anybody that wants to learn about how to interview, how to prepare, from building the resume to how to speak to the recruiter to then when you get hired. It's like it's an entire career playbook to me. So that was really cool. I was like, oh, wow. So I resonated with so much of it in my own career. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Thank you. A lot of advice out there is like to really be narrow in your focus, and we just couldn't help ourselves like to think about a career from end to end and all that stuff in the middle about just looking for a job and how to go about finding the right fit for yourself and all those things that you need to do to understand how to network or how to communicate with recruiters or how to be successful when you land that first job or a next job. It's not like we can leave that out of the book. So it's that's again gets back to the whole idea of a handbook. It's like, hey, there's a lot of topics in here, but they're not like 20 pages each or anything. It's like hopefully just get to the point of like what are some good advice and tips I can follow.
And you said you wrote it with your partner. How was that?
Yeah, well, my partner is also my wife. It's interesting because, as I said, we worked more than half our careers together. So it's not like we didn't have experience working together before. And we brought a lot to the table together. I've never taught, so she has a lot of perspective in, how to actually teach properly. She's got her master's in teaching as well. So it was a great combination of experiences that we could bring together.
So in your book, you talk about storytelling and presenting like a pro and how these are essential skills to have, not just to share work, but to build trust and lead. Now, why do you think storytelling and presenting like a pro are so crucial to design today?
Storytelling is a topic that I talk about a lot, and I'm not the only one, of course. In fact, it's like the final slides in a presentation that I often give on careers. I start by saying that you must get really good at it. Like it's like a non-negotiable. The why of that is that what I say is that every time you tell a good story, you have the opportunity to inform, inspire, and most importantly, influence. I think of those as like the 3 power levels of storytelling and why it's so important. It's funny because it's been in the conversation a bit lately because of AI. If you think about storytelling, it really is what makes us human. Storytelling is as old as communication. It's an art form. And, getting back to the AI point, why it's so important today is because we're challenged to discern like what is human generated versus what is AI generated today. And I really think that storytelling is like one of the responsibilities that needs to be protected as humans. Dipping over to presentation for a minute, it's very intertwined with storytelling. Obviously, presenting implies that you're showing visuals. But what I tell people is that whether you're presenting to somebody in person or remotely, the best presentations are when the audience is engaged and paying attention to you as the speaker. And, those visuals should just be like your supportive props. The worst case scenario is that when your audience has to pay attention to you or has to like read slides or look at what they're seeing and they're not really getting, the emotion that you're trying to express there. But the best storytelling really demands that audience attention. Those storytellers know how to vary pace and use the right kind of dramatic pauses and reveal information. That's the feeling that comes out of like how and why we are inspired by storytellers, and why it has such power to influence.
As a designer, how did that influence you and how did that impact you? And how are you a designer? How did you become a good storyteller?
Why it's important to design. So design is literally about storytelling. So what we do when we're doing design is we're trying to help people imagine a solution and why it's the best solution or why it's a solution worthy of exploring or testing. When we design something, whether it's a physical product or a visual interface, a service, there's one argument that like, oh, the design should speak for itself, and that's true. It has to have a certain quality that people can understand it immediately. That is all true. But as a designer, when you're in that process, you have to convince your stakeholders, your partners, your cross-functional groups, your marketing teams. You have to convince yourself that a design is good. And so that's a combination of you're like testing things out. But a lot of times your stakeholders and even sometimes your partners, they're not as embedded in that process. A lot of times you have to express that solution to other people. And that's where presentations come in mind. And yes, you show them prototypes or you show them design examples. But again, you have to convince them that this is the best direction to take or get them excited about these ideas that you have or your teams have had. So getting to the second part, which is like, how do you get good at storytelling? I'm not going to speak, I'm not going to claim to be the best storyteller. So let me just get that out of the way. And there's 3 things I tell people. The first is reading a lot. And I'm talking about anything like fiction, nonfiction, articles, opinions, case studies. You really start to pick up a lot of tips on formal and informal way of, not only writing, but also speaking. And especially you'll start to, analyze or think about how you write or how you talk and when you're being overly complex, because a good goal of storytelling is like simplicity and concision. The second advice is to pay attention to speakers. So everybody's watching conferences and webinars and YouTube videos. just pay attention. I still tell people, go watch TED Talks. There's a reason why they're amazing. Those speakers practice a lot. That's the whole point of TED Talks. And I already gave away the third tip, which is practice. So when you're going to give a presentation, you have to like write down the script. You have to practice it over and over. You have to like analyze what flows well. You have to talk out loud and hear yourself. And sometimes people call it a talk track, but the point is you have to practice storytelling.
So you've talked about doing the work, iteration, failure, learning through process. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I think that, this gets back into that iterative kind of mindset that you have to like try things out. You have to experiment. You have to build upon what you learn. I think there's a lot of fear when it comes to like putting work out there. Even when we're talking about like launching products, and especially designers, like we are definitely a batch of people. We're very self-critical. We're very much perfectionists. We would tweak endlessly if we could. I will say that if it comes to like more serious things like, there's physical safety or finances or health, of course we have to take that care in building and launching products. But if it's anything that's not so serious, and especially digital, where you have that capability to iterate, we have to just get over it and launch things. Like it's at the end of the day, it's really the only way we can actually measure what works. It's the only way to measure actual impact. And again, with specifically from a designer angle, a lot of things that designers hear over and over is that we have to connect the work that we do to the business. And you can't do that unless you actually launch things at whatever scale, you can, in order to see if it's successful or to decide if, it needs more iteration.
So you talk about design sense and how it matters more than taste. First of all, what does that mean? And let's unpack that a little bit.
Yes. I talk about design sense in the final chapter of the book. I expanded upon it recently in a Substack post in relation to AI. So it's not that I don't believe taste matters. I feel like it's thought of as an abstract thing. We often say that people have taste, or they don't have good taste, and that may be a true assessment. Design sense is a term that we use in our field, and when we say somebody has a developed or mature design sense, what we mean is that they instinctively understand and use the foundational design principles. When they look at something, whether it's a physical thing or something visual again, they like immediately are analyzing shapes or proportions or seams or layouts, typefaces, kerning, balance and grid, all of these kind of nerdy things that designers think about. Designers are they should be very detail oriented in that way. If somebody has a really mature design sense, they will recognize when design principles or rules are followed or broken. Particularly, they will think about whether those rules were broken intentionally. And sometimes we will applaud that. That means the designer made a conscious choice to do something differently for many, many different reasons. Even if we still judge whether what they designed was, successful or not, but, we'll at least have that thought. The last thing I'll say, and why I wrote about this recently, is that the word taste has been popping up again in the dialogue about AI a lot. And it's essentially that taste, or my stand-in at design sense, is really critically needed to determine or discern, what is good output from AI. And in best case scenario, to actually steer how we develop with AI. So to make sure that we're not blindly accepting, what's generated as the best or the most correct or the most appropriate thing. So that's why, that's been in such the discourse lately and how I relate it back to design sense.
In the book, you talked about spelunking. Is that how you say it?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
That's the first time I've ever heard of this, and I love it. So what is spelunking, and how do people use this to further their careers?
Sure. So first of all, I've done rock climbing, but I've actually never done very serious spelunking. So for people that don't know what it is, spelunking is just the term for cave exploration. What I use the term spelunking for is really a metaphor for just digging into any and all resources you can when you join a new company or a team. Now, of course, you should be talking to people and you should be asking lots of questions, but oftentimes you get access to like documents, project documents, specifications, marketing plans, research, the kind of things you didn't have access to before you joined a company. So I say, like, why wouldn't you take advantage of like poking around and all that stuff? What it does, besides, at larger companies especially, of course, you're going to have like an onboarding process and all of that. But you're going to get like the clean, sanitized version of like how things work around here, what's happened in the past. And when you go spelunking on your own and you go poking around these things, not only do you get yourself up to speed really quickly, one other kind of side benefit is oftentimes you start to see who are the people that have influence around here. And guess what? Those are probably people you want to get to know a little bit better. And, what else the other thing that it does is, things that you learn might prompt you with some really good questions to ask in one-on-ones when you meet people, or even in group meetings. And, of course, asking questions is like a core thing, right? It's like demonstrating our curiosity, but it also shows when you come up with information or you ask about things that have happened, sometimes before you even got there. It just shows that you're jumping in right away. You're ready to be productive and you're ready to be collaborative, especially in that narrow period where you get to play the new person card. So sometimes you can kind of bring up things that, that other people can't bring up because you get to be the naive person. Even if sometimes those things might be controversial, but at least they can get a dialogue started. So it has a lot of benefits. I actually did this at 23andMe, and I'll just be really brief in this little anecdote, but it's how I identified a bunch of cross-functional partners that I decided to invite to participate in a few design sprints that I had. And they all turned out very impactful because those were people that sort of had strong voices in their different departments. And so they kind of bought into the kind of directions that we decided upon through that process.
Like, I really related to this because I feel like a lot of people don't talk about this. So I really think you need to frame this as, you really need to turn this into a framework, like an official framework. Talk to us about Litterati. What do they do at Litterati, and what did you do?
Yeah, Litterati is awesome. I mean, I do like to talk about Litterati. It's a project that was really the baby of my friend Jeff, and it's really about like crowdsource cleaning the planet. That was sort of like the premise.
Oh, cool.
Us meeting was like really a serendipitous thing. Like we met working on another project, and it was that kind of classic moment where he's like, "Hey, I have this idea." And for anybody that's in design or in product development, you might have heard of like this like thought process called "How might we?" It's kind of like a design exercise, and it's a way to like imagine something or how would you accomplish something. And when we started talking about his idea to crowdsource clean the planet, we had this like, how might we get people to pick up litter? That was literally the question. And it grew from an experiment to a mobile app to a global initiative. By the way, this is one of the projects I'm very proud of because it had like an actual social, societal impact. At the end of the day, and I was just there for the early years, and I'm proud to have contributed through that early process and thinking about the specifications and the future of where that platform could go. Again, it still exists today, but I think they've collected over 11 million pieces of litter have been picked up around the world in like more than 100 countries. And the important thing is not only, does that have a clear benefit, but a massive amount of data has been collected on that litter. So I'm talking about like the type of litter. Was it like, a can? Was it a plastic fork? And very importantly, was it like a cigarette butt? So what were the materials? And sometimes what were the brands as well? So all that data has been used to evaluate not only the litter impact in those environments, but also to inform initiatives. Like some specific ones that come to mind were reduction of single-use plastics, And another and really important one was adjusting the taxes on tobacco products in a few different cities. So yeah, it was pretty amazing the impact that very small idea grew into. But yeah, it was really about like staying committed to that North Star of what the core idea was, and just grinding it out. Finding ways to continue to fund it, from grants to partnerships to brands and cities that actually commissioned research.
So from that, you started mentoring, and I think it sounds like you've always been a mentor type of person. I mean, you wrote this book with your partner, your wife. So talk about your mentorship and coaching. You've done it through first round ADP list, and you've done it inside companies. Talk about that a little bit more, and why is that so important to you?
Yeah, yeah. Even informally, when you're starting your career and you start to get this level where you're managing people, everybody has to mentor people, right? And so of course I've always done it throughout my career when I've had teams of people, especially hiring junior product managers, designers, engineers, researchers, whatever it may be. But it wasn't until I got involved with this program through an invitation with First Round Capital, where people that were in industry were mentoring first round capitals and some external portfolio of their founders. And so I was able to mentor not only some product folks, but also they started getting more designers in their portfolio as well from their companies. So I just think it's so important for people to have, when they're coming up in career, to have people to provide guidance and support. I will say, there is one thing that people should know about mentorship. It's that every mentorship pairing is not going to be ideal, and that's okay. There's this idea that, I have to find a mentor and they're going to be my mentor throughout my career or my life. And that is possible, of course, but there's another concept. And in fact, we write about this in the book where, this isn't a term that I came up with. Somebody else had this idea of like creating your own personal board of directors. It's like, hey, you should think about the different aspects
I
of
thought
your
that
life.
was so brilliant. I was like, wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's a really powerful idea. But the point is that like in different aspects of your life or career, to have people that you go to. And so you're as an individual, you're becoming, you enable yourself to be less dependent on one person for advice or support. But getting back to mentorship, and where I was going with that was that, not every relationship is going to be ideal, and it's okay if you part ways. But when there's mutual respect and the communication is smooth, then both people are going to benefit from that relationship. And that's really, really, not to sound cheesy, but that is very special. Um, so one thing I will say is that mentees should realize that there's no exact answers to every challenge they're going to face. And if they realize that, they won't be disappointed. And most importantly, they need to understand that mentors are there to support you and guide you in making decisions. Like that's the whole point of mentorship. It's not to give you, the exact answers to the problems you have or the exact things that you need to do to be successful. On the flip side, mentors need to realize that different people respond to different communication styles. So, some mentees will come with a specific list of questions or topics they want to get into. They're very methodical. They take notes. And other mentees they may need a bit more prodding and need to talk things out. So I always tell fellow mentors, like, get specific as you can about what the person's goals are, and ask if they're okay with like very direct feedback, which I think is the most helpful. I start every single mentorship when I meet somebody new by telling them that I like to be very direct and when I give feedback, but it's because I want to be the most helpful with actionable advice as fast as possible. And I'm always thankful for that approach.
You speak about career pivots in your book, and for people who are rethinking what to do with their lives, what do you recommend somebody do?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the $1,000,000 question right now, right? Because as you said, there's a ton of people that are struggling with this right now. The very first thing is like we have to be open to pivots. And, in a bit of a harder way of saying that is like we have to be open to disrupting ourselves, especially mid-career to later today. As you said, like things are changing fast. You have to keep up. There's really no choice. It may not be comforting to hear this, but those of us that have like decades of experience, we have come through the other side of major disruptions in work and technology, especially a few times. Now, this is much different than it has been in the past, but especially in the world of like building and designing products. But the second thing I'll say is that we have to give ourselves like permission and acknowledge that we can have multiple interests. So we can decide to just do something different. Now, this can be something as subtle as exploring a different industry where we can apply our transferable skills. Or it can be something much more dramatic. I think a lot of times people are afraid they think like their past experience is not relevant. And a lot of times you really talk to them like, well, what did you actually do at your job? And you can help a lot of people realize that a lot of the skills that they've built are transferable. I talk to people all the time. This has happened. It happens a lot actually, but oh geez, it's been a couple examples. I'm trying to find a good one. There was somebody who was literally a medical doctor in another country, is now here studying design from the beginning, and she didn't even want to talk about her past experience as a doctor. And I'm like, particularly for design, when we talk about human-centeredness and empathy, like there's nobody more empathetic than a doctor that helps people with, whatever serious conditions. And the other thing about like having any kind of past work experience, even if it's something, like working retail or whatever it is, like the fact that you had a job and you had to work with other people and you had you had responsibilities, you had things that you had to get done on time, if you had to collaborate, like all those skills are transferable. So you have to just realize you have more capabilities and experience than you give yourself credit for. And so it is possible to kind of leverage that experience when you are considering a pivot.
Are you willing to tell us about what you're doing now in your pivot?
Sure, a little bit. So I've been thinking about a way to articulate this whole concept. And, again, it's not quite in the book that we wrote before because that was very tactical and starts at the beginning of a career. But, I couldn't help but sneak in later in the book about thinking about your career ahead and thinking about the future and the things that you should be doing now to prepare for that. And so there was a lot more when I was reflecting on my career when we were writing that first book that just didn't fit in that first book. And a lot of that stuff, this is about this as far as I'm going to hint here. A lot of those stories were like what I call like a bit spicier stories. And so I really just felt that those stories are worth telling because, as you know, like we see a lot of the positive success stories by people, and you really have to dig to see where people were struggled or had conflicts or had adversity they had to overcome, and really you can learn a lot more from those experiences. And so I'm getting a little bit heavier into that topic. I will say it's going to be a book. Like this is one thing that's more of a personal choice. I need that structure and that format that's a little bit different. And so, so I'm writing a second book.
Well, that's exciting.
Thanks.
And what's the goal? When are you looking to launch that?
Oh, I don't know. The last book took way longer than I expected. I do think this one will be a lot faster because it's a little bit more experiential, a little bit more narrative. So I think and in that way, it's also a lot more fun for me right now. But yeah, I hope there's some interesting angles that'll make it attractive to people to want to check out.
Kevin, thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you?
Definitely find me on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm pretty active. I definitely post things and engage in the community. Obviously, a big tip for people that should be networking all the time. But I'm on Instagram. But I'd say start with LinkedIn. You can find pretty much everything else there. I've got links to the book website and a Substack, and I'm also on Instagram. And I tell people all the time, connect with me too. Yeah, I'm happy to, meet more people, hear what they've got going on, learn, share as well.
What are 3 things people can contact you about on LinkedIn?
Career advice. It's funny. I can't believe one of the first things that popped in mind was AI because I'm not saying I enjoy talking about it, but I do literally talk about it every day. So it's the reason why it's important to keep talking about it is because I think everybody needs to pay attention to what's going on and figure out where it fits in what they're doing, not only as, professionals in their workspaces, but also, again, as humans. So that's a hot topic. But yeah, just, if you've got something interesting too that you want to share, I love learning about what people have going on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being on the Media Machine podcast, and I'm sure you will be back. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Joanna. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening to our show. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us at the Media Machine Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. The Media Machine is hosted by Johanna Salazar. Our producers are Mia Vinciguerra and Johanna Salazar. This episode was edited by Andrés Cote. This episode features music from Envato Elements. Thanks for listening.